Hi guys, I just want to say a special thank you to all my channel members, my VIPs. We're over 70 strong now. Their names are on the screen. I appreciate each and every one of you. I'm so proud of our little community, so thank you so much. Anyway, now on with the video. Eleanor Williams is a deeply disturbed woman who, in March 2023, aged 22, was jailed for a series of false allegations of rape against 4 men. Her stories were pure fantasy. She claimed to have been trafficked into sex work and even sold at an auction in Amsterdam. She posted pictures of herself with horrific injuries, which she claimed had been the result of being repeatedly beaten and raped. These were in fact injuries she caused to herself, all part of her sick campaign to get attention. Some of her claims were clearly taken straight from Hollywood films, specifically Taken. However, unlike this tale of fiction, there are real victims of Williams' lies. She accused 4 men of some of the most serious crimes imaginable, although they were all completely innocent. Some of the men she accused had only the briefest of interactions with her, and one of them had never even met her. The next thing they knew, they had the police hammering down their door, arresting them on suspicion of being a rapist and a sex trafficker. Williams' horrific lies were spread far and wide, with her using social media to gain the attention she desperately sought. This led to a campaign being started online called Justice for Ellie, and over £20,000 being raised to support her. Due to her lies, all of the men's lives were ruined, and 3 of them tried to commit suicide. One spent over 2 months in prison, and another was sectioned. She accused both white men and Asian men of totally fabricated offences, and her claims against the latter led to a wave of hate crimes against completely innocent Asian families and businesses in her hometown of Barrow-in-Furness in the county of Cumbria in the UK. Despite her lies being picked apart, Williams remained defiant to the end. This woman's poison affected the lives of so many people, diminished the struggle of real victims, and demonstrates the sickness of some people to use the most serious issues purely to get themselves attention. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Eleanor Williams was born around the year 2000 and brought up in a middle-class household on Walney Island, which is part of the town of Barrow-in-Furness, which is more commonly known simply as Barrow, in the county of Cumbria in northwest England. She was raised by her mother, Alison Johnston, and her stepfather, Ronnie Johnston. She was the youngest of 3 children. Later, in court, no specific evidence of childhood trauma was presented, but it's clear that she's been disturbed from a very young age. During her school years, she was frequently truant, and her classmates described her as a strange girl. She began using drugs from a young age, and would frequently disappear from home, being reported missing and found by the police in various parts of the northwest of England, out of her head on drugs. Williams was a compulsive liar. Aside from the various false claims of rape she made, she also told people that she had a son called Bailey, despite her never having given birth, and she also stated that she'd once been hospitalised due to complications after receiving a backstreet abortion. Looking at her behaviour, I think it's clear that from a young age, Eleanor Williams' whole life revolved around getting attention. Going missing was likely a way for her to cause fuss, including emotional distress to her parents, and also causing the police to exert resources looking for her. Her stories about having a child and being in hospital due to complications from an abortion indicate 2 things. Firstly, it shows the extent to which she was willing to go in order to gain the attention she craved, but, with regards to the abortion story, indicates she would deliberately pick topics which she knew that, even if people had suspicions, due to the sensitive nature of the topic, they'd be unlikely to challenge her. Who wants to be the person who accuses a woman who states that she's had an abortion of being a liar? However, this was just the tip of the iceberg, and by the age of 16 years old, Eleanor Williams began to use another sensitive and extremely serious topic, specifically claims about rape and sex trafficking, to get attention for herself, and in the process, destroyed countless lives. The first accusation made by Eleanor Williams occurred in November 2017, when she was 16 years old. She was at a house party, hosted by a man who was only referred to as C in the later court case. During the evening, Williams got drunk and smoked a large amount of cannabis, meaning she was sick. C and Williams' friends called her mother and sister, who arrived and took her to hospital. When she was there, she claimed that C had raped her. The police were called, and she claimed C had kissed her, touched her bottom, groped her breasts, and then raped her, and threatened to set his dog on her, and then bury her body in the garden, or dump her in the sea if she told anyone. None of the other people at the party supported Williams' claims, but, obviously, a serious crime was reported, and so on the 27th of November 2017, a few days after the party, C was shot when the police hammered on his door and arrested him on suspicion of rape. He was interviewed and bailed, and spent the next few months in a state of absolute terror whilst the police investigated this fictitious offence. Eventually, in January 2018, Williams withdrew her support for a prosecution, and the investigation was wound down, and in March 2018, C was informed that no further action would be taken. As we'll get to later, C was completely devastated by this false accusation, but Eleanor Williams didn't care about any of this. She was solely focused on herself and getting attention. While C was only accused once, Williams' next victim, 18-year-old Jordan Trengove, was accused of rape 3 times. The first incident, again, began with her drinking too much and getting high on cannabis. This was on a night out with her friends at a nightclub between the 8th of March and into the 9th of March 2019. Jordan, who it seems had either met Williams only once before or had never met her before this night, was out with his friends, and the two groups began talking. They spent about 2 hours in each other's company and then went their separate ways. Due to essentially being semi-conscious, Williams had to be taken home. It appears that people were soon talking about her drunken behaviour on that night, and so, over the next few days, in order to switch the focus away from her poor behaviour, she again came up with a story to try and make herself out to be the victim. She claimed that Jordan had taken her to a location out of town, raped her, and then dumped her back on the streets. It's not clear when she claimed this happened, whether this was after she returned home or on another day. But regardless of this detail, Williams went to great lengths in order to sell her story. She used a second phone to send herself messages, apparently from Jordan, in which he admitted raping her and threatened what would happen to her if she told anyone. Williams took screenshots of these messages and showed them to the police whilst making a false report. These messages would eventually be used against her because she'd used the Wi-Fi in her home to connect both phones to, and so location analysis would show that the messages were sent from and received in the same place. In the short term, a few days after the night out, Jordan was arrested on suspicion of rape. He had a solid alibi and was utterly astonished that a girl he'd barely spoken to had accused him of such a serious crime. Regardless of what came next, the damage was already done. Because of his arrest, he and his family were the subject of hate from the neighbours when the word rapist was sprayed on his front door. Williams was not done with him yet. On the 6th of May 2019, she called the police and claimed that Jordan had come to her flat, refused to leave, before pulling out a knife, dragging him into the bathroom and raping her. Jordan had apparently beaten Williams, and she showed the police bruising to her legs, injuries she caused to herself. Jordan was arrested for a second time for rape. He was again bailed whilst the police investigated, and he had conditions not to contact Eleanor Williams. On the 18th of May 2019, Williams called the police again, claiming that Jordan had raped her for a third time. This had apparently happened after a night out when she came home. He'd apparently burst through the door, which was unlocked because she was expecting a friend, beat her, and then raped her. Again, to sell her story, she'd scratched and bruised herself. After calling the police, she left the front door open, stripped naked, lay on the floor, and pretended to be unconscious. Jordan was nowhere near the property at this point, but regardless, he was arrested for a third time, and this time there was no bail. He was remanded into prison by the courts and spent 2 months in a prison cell until August 2019, when he was released, and the police stated they wouldn't be pursuing the matter any further. The elaborate nature of Eleanor Williams' lies escalated quickly, and her next target was a local businessman called Mohammed Ramzan, known as Mo. Mo was a successful businessman who owned several restaurants, ice cream vans, and rental properties in the town of Barrow. He was also married and a father to 4 children. He was a man of impeccable character who was well known in the area due to his business ventures. He'd never met Eleanor Williams before. However, beginning on the 18th of June 2019, Eleanor Williams claimed to the police that Mo was in fact a hardened criminal, a sex trafficker who'd been abusing her for years, as well as offering her to other men to abuse, both here and overseas. Williams claimed that they'd met when she was around 12 or 13 years old, and soon after, he began having sex with her. She then said that Mo had persuaded her to have sex with other men, and that she'd been taken around the northwest of England and forced to engage in sex parties with other men. Williams said she wasn't alone. She provided approximately 60 names of girls who she said were also abused. She described horrific acts of abuse, including acts of physical violence and vaginal and anal rape, all of which she said was filmed and then sold. She stated that she'd been shown videos of other girls being abused. She provided a long list of Asian men, mainly of Pakistani origin, that were apparently involved in the violation of not only her, but the other alleged victims. However, she wasn't done yet. She also told the police that in 2018, when on a trip to Amsterdam, Mo Ramzan had forced her to work in a brothel and had sold her at an auction for €25,000. An attempt was also apparently made to take her to Pakistan. Back in the UK, she said that she was forced to live in a caravan for 2 weeks, where she was subdued with heroin and then taken to sex parties with other trafficked girls. On another occasion, again in 2018, she claimed that Mo had taken her to Ibiza for 2 weeks, where men paid to have sex with her. The extent of Williams' callousness and planning was shown by the extent to which she went to gather quote-unquote evidence. She would manipulate people she knew, asking them to send her sexually explicit messages. Sometimes these were specifically requested, or she would contact people that she knew had feelings for her and begin a sexual conversation with them in order to get the type of messages that she wanted. She would then change the name on the phone to the name of one of her alleged abusers, including Mo, and then take screenshots of these, which she would then show to the police. She would also write letters to herself, claiming they were from the traffickers. Many of the men she claimed were part of this paedophile ring were entirely fictitious. Some, however, were Asian men in the local area who she knew of. All were entirely innocent. Similarly, with the girls she claimed were victims, many were completely made up. However, some of the girls were real. They were ones she'd been to school with or gone on nights out with. Many of them testified in court about being shocked and sickened when the police knocked on their door, and that they had no idea what Williams was talking about. Williams' lies were, to a great extent, ridiculous and easily refutable. For example, she did go to Amsterdam in 2018 with her sister and her sister's partner, and they testified that she'd never been out of their sight. With regards to her claim of being taken to Ibiza by Mo and forced to have sex with other men, it can be proven that Mo had never been to Ibiza, and at the time she claimed this was going on, his credit card was being used in the UK. During one specific incident she claimed had occurred, supervised by Mo, he was shown to be in a branch of B&Q in Barrow. However, it took time to unpick Eleanor Williams' lies, and in the meantime, real lives were being destroyed. On the 7th of July 2019, Mo Ramzan was driving in Barrow when he realised he was being followed. This was an unmarked police car. He was pulled over and expected to potentially be given a ticket due to his driving or something wrong with the vehicle. However, instead, in the middle of the street, he was arrested on suspicion of rape, human trafficking, and sexual exploitation of a minor. From that moment, Mo's life was essentially destroyed. The fact he'd been arrested, and for what, quickly became common knowledge. Mo was questioned for 3 days and then released on bail, pending further inquiries. He became a social pariah, was called a pedo by people in the street, and spat on. However, his harassment would get worse later, again due to the actions of Eleanor Williams. I imagine that the police were, at this point, so around the end of June 2019, beginning of July 2019, beginning to have their suspicions. However, it was Williams' next 2 stunts which essentially began to seal her fate, at least in the eyes of the authorities. Specifically, due to concerns for Williams' safety, in June 2019, she was housed in a hotel just over 30 miles away from Barrow in a town called Kendal. This hotel was located close to the police station, so that if something happened, they could initiate a rapid response. On the 30th of June 2019, Williams left the hotel provided by the police and travelled to the town of Blackpool by train. This was not a random journey, she'd booked herself a hotel room there. When she got to the hotel, she sat in the room and watched YouTube videos. Every part of her journey was captured on CCTV, and on her way to the hotel, she was seen to take down the licence plate of a random vehicle and also take down details of local takeaway. The next day, the 1st of July, she woke up in the hotel room and travelled to the town of Preston by train. Throughout the previous day and overnight, the police and Williams' family were texting and calling repeatedly, saying they were scared for her safety. She ignored all the calls and carried on watching videos on her phone. The police were able to track Williams and met her in Preston and took her back to the hotel in Kendal. She was spoken to about what had happened and where she'd gone. Now remember, she'd spent most of the previous day sat in a hotel room. However, she said that Mo had found her in the hotel in Kendal and instructed her to go to Blackpool. She'd apparently travelled there alone, but had met him at the station. He then transported her to 4 separate properties in the town. On each occasion, she was raped by multiple men. She then provided the police with the random registration number and takeaway details she'd taken down, and told them this was the vehicle that Mo was driving. The takeaway was one of the locations of the rapes. Police officers took Williams to Blackpool twice in order to try and locate where the offences had occurred, but her memory apparently failed her. Just over 2 weeks later, on the 18th of July 2019, Eleanor Williams caught a train to Leeds. She had 2 mobile phones on her at this point. Again, her entire journey, including her time in Leeds, was captured on CCTV, and it showed that she spent almost all day sat in a park. In the late evening, she travelled to Preston and walked into the town centre, and there she came across a man called Oliver Gardner, a man in his early 20s. He'd been in the town centre drinking and was clearly intoxicated. They had a brief conversation and then walked off towards an alleyway together and apparently had consensual sex, which lasted a few minutes. They then exchanged numbers and Oliver stumbled off. The pair exchanged messages whilst Williams travelled back to Barrow. By this point, she'd moved out of the hotel provided to her by the police and decided to return back to her own flat. Throughout the day, Williams had again been ignoring multiple messages from the police and her family, who were frantic and worried. Eventually, the police found her late at night in the flat in Barrow, and Williams was pretending to be semi-conscious. She was covered in bruises and other injuries, all self-inflicted. They asked her what had happened. What she told them was absolute lunacy. She claimed that on the 17th of July, so the day before she went to Leeds, one of the sex traffickers working with Mo, a man named Salsa, now I assume that's a nickname, but seriously, this guy was completely made up, you'll be surprised to know, had apparently come to her door, slapped her in the face, and pinned her to the wall by the neck. He then told her to follow orders that she'd get on Snapchat. These orders said that she'd lost the money and she needed to earn them £10,000, and, as a result, she needed to travel to Leeds the next day. When she went to Leeds, rather than stating that she sat in a park half the day, which was the truth, which was caught on camera, she claimed that she was transported, along with other girls, to various properties where she had sex with various men. She claimed that at one point she saw her passport on a table with a ring on it and flight details to Bangladesh. She was apparently able to simply run away. She then received a call saying she had to go to Preston, and it was here that she met a man, Oliver Gardner, who, instead of being just some guy she bumped into, was now a sex trafficker, and apparently he took her to 2 Asian men who had paid to have sex with her, but not before raping her in an alleyway. She was then allowed to travel back to Barrow on her own by train, being met at the station by Salsa again, who then drove her home. However, this wasn't the end of the story. When they got home, Salsa and another man forced their way inside her property, beat her and raped her, and then left, just 10 minutes before the police found her in a semi-conscious state. She then showed them messages which she sent between her 2 phones, apparently from a girl who'd also been at one of the sex parties she'd been forced to attend. Poor Oliver Gardner was quickly arrested, but not just for rape, but for sex trafficking. This arrest essentially destroyed his life. He tried to commit suicide twice. However, very quickly, Williams' story was coming apart. By this point, the police had essentially decimated her lies. They'd been able to establish that Mo had never been to Ibiza and was not in Amsterdam, where Williams claimed he'd been there, selling her into sexual slavery. CCTV of her movements in Blackpool were checked, along with location data from her phone, showing that she'd spent the majority of her time sat in a hotel room watching YouTube videos. CCTV footage and location data of her most recent claims about going to Leeds, then to Preston, and then to Barrow, being raped in all 3 locations, showed she was lying. In particular, CCTV showed her sitting in a park alone in Leeds and walking back from Barrow station on her own. Mythical Salsa was nowhere to be seen. They were also able to show she doctored evidence, including sending herself messages from different devices. On July the 20th, 2019, just 2 days after our last heinous lies, Eleanor Williams was arrested on suspicion of perverting the course of justice. The web that Williams spun was so extensive and complicated that the police needed time to investigate, and she was released on bail. So Eleanor Williams had been found out. She was now in serious trouble. However, this didn't stop her. In fact, her behaviour became worse. This woman's desire for attention was so profound that she was willing to destroy everyone's lives, including her own, to get what she wanted. And so, with the police no longer giving her the attention she wanted, she went on social media. It was clear that despite being arrested by the police, and being on bail for perverting the course of justice, Eleanor Williams had no desire or potentially any ability to stop. So, on the evening of the 18th of May 2020, she left home at around 10:50 p.m, and, after a call was made to the police, she was found lying in some fields close to her home. She had multiple injuries, and her face had been so badly beaten that her eye was sealed shut. There were also injuries to her legs and abdomen. All of these were caused with a hammer. The top of her little finger had also been severed. She told the police that evening she had intended to catch the bus into Barrow Town Centre when one of the men who apparently had been involved in trafficking her had pulled up in a car and offered her a lift. She'd apparently accepted and then been driven to her property 10 miles away and gang raped by multiple men who had then attacked her with a hammer and apparently tried to cut her finger off. She claimed to have been driven back and walked to the place where the police had then found her. The police were sceptical, and even more so when a few days later they found the hammer lying close to where Williams had been found. There was blood on the hammerhead which matched her DNA, and her fingerprints were found on the handle. Police later recovered CCTV footage of Williams buying the hammer on the 11th of May 2020, as well as the accompanying receipt. To give you an idea how mentally ill this person is, I need to say it plainly. Eleanor Williams bought a hammer and beat herself with it, just to sell her story and to get attention. On Wednesday, May the 20th, 2020, Eleanor Williams shared a 1,362 word post on Facebook. This would be her ultimate undoing, but not before causing irreparable harm to an entire community due to her utter selfishness. The post began, quote, "This is the hardest post I'm ever going to write. I didn't want to share this because I'm scared of the judgment that will come with it. It's why I keep quiet about what's happened to me. But people have asked me to tell my story. When people have asked why I've had a black eye or bruises, I've made every excuse, from falling over to banging it on a door." She continued later stating, quote, "Yesterday, I was put in the back of a car, taken to an address to have sex with 3 Asian men. Afterwards, I was beaten because I was in debt to these men for not attending parties for over 7 weeks due to coronavirus. The organisers of the party decided to beat me to teach me a lesson." She also posted various pictures, which she claimed showed her injuries from years of sexual abuse, which were all self-inflicted. This included the pictures she'd taken of her injuries from beating herself with a hammer a few days beforehand. The post did not name anyone specifically, but all 4 men that Williams had accused of rape were mentioned in the comments by other people, and the focus was predominantly on Mo Ramzan because of his ethnicity. His businesses were vandalised, he, his family and children were threatened with death, and he specifically received threats saying that men were going to break in and rape his wife. This post would have been inflammatory in and of itself, but it occurred at the worst possible time. Specifically, during the early 2010s, the nation was shocked by news that a paedophile ring, consisting mainly of British Pakistani men, had been involved in the systematic sexual abuse and trafficking of numerous, predominantly white British girls who were utterly failed by the police, with the locus of this criminality being the town of Rochdale in Greater Manchester. The subsequent investigation eventually led to 47 victims being identified and 12 men convicted for crimes against them. However, as time has progressed, including this year, further stories of similar gangs around the north of England have been reported in the media. People have been justifiably sickened by these stories. Also, by the time of Eleanor Williams' post, the UK was in full lockdown. People were scared, angry, and spending far more time on social media. Quickly, the post had been shared 100,000 times, and a campaign was quickly set up called Justice for Ellie. A logo was designed, a purple elephant, and this soon began appearing on the front doors in the town of Barrow. A fundraising page was also set up, which raised £22,000, apparently to help fund Williams' relocation to her own flat, away from the horror she'd apparently experienced. Obviously, nowhere in any of her posts did she mention the fact that she was on bail due to lying to the police. The police were appalled. By this point, they knew that Williams was lying, but she had now lit a powder keg and put targets on the back of even more innocent people. Unfortunately, the incident acted as a dog whistle to far-right groups, including the notorious racist Tommy Robinson and his merry band of idiots who descended on the area to, quote, investigate, i.e. shitstir, and this is what happened. Businesses were vandalised, including many Indian restaurants, as it's clear these idiots do not know the difference between people from Pakistan and India. They just wanted to target anyone who was brown. Innocent people were harassed, abused, and at least one family had to relocate out of the area due to a credible threat to their life. They were also protesting in the street against the Asian community and the police. The police were in an impossible position. They released a statement saying they had no evidence of any sex trafficking groups in the area, but this was then spun to accuse them of covering up their own incompetence. They couldn't also come out and specifically say, "She's lying," as this would have been like a red rag to a bull. There was no good outcome to this. Either they let Eleanor Williams remain at liberty and she would inevitably continue to spin her lies and accuse even more men of crimes they hadn't committed, or they arrest her and remand her into prison, but this would then lead to them being accused of trying to silence an innocent victim. They chose the latter option, and Eleanor Williams was arrested again. This time, in May 2020, she was remanded into prison. The backlash was predictable. The police were accused of persecuting an innocent victim whilst covering up for the predators. Now, it does seem that Eleanor Williams was released sometime later, with strict conditions to live and sleep at a certain address, but in November 2021, she breached these conditions, and again her bail was revoked and she was sent back to prison. This time, she wouldn't be released again and would sit in prison to await her day in court. Eventually, Eleanor Williams was charged with 9 counts of perverting the course of justice. This included false allegations of rape and other serious offences against 4 men. Her court case was set to begin in October 2022. Eleanor Williams pleaded not guilty to 8 counts of perverting the course of justice, but pleaded guilty to 1 offence. This guilty plea related to her writing to her family when she was in prison, trying to get them to falsify information to the police. However, she denied every single allegation related to her fantastical and delusional claims against the 4 innocent men she had targeted. The trial began on October 10, 2022 at Preston Crown Court. The prosecution tore Williams' lies apart. CCTV footage and location monitoring was used to show that she was lying. Handwriting experts showed that she'd written letters to herself, and many of the girls that she claimed had been victims of sex trafficking took the stand and said they had no idea what she was talking about. Williams, when confronted with her lies, simply stated that she'd been told to convey these false stories by the mythical sex traffickers. The trial concluded in January 2023 and took the jury a matter of hours to convict Eleanor Williams of all 8 counts of perverting the course of justice. She was told that she would remain in prison pending the outcome of psychiatric and psychological assessments. I'll return to the contents of these later, but, to summarise, they provided no real insight into why Williams did what she did. On the 14th of March 2023, Eleanor Williams appeared back at Preston Crown Court before Judge Robert Altham. Prior to the sentencing itself, a letter was read out by the defence, written by Williams, which stated, quote, "I know I've made some mistakes, and I'm sorry. I was young and confused. I'm not saying I'm guilty, but I know I've done some wrong, and so I'm sorry. So essentially, I'm sorry, but I'm not guilty." This was one of the few instances where the sentencing hearing was televised, and I want to play a portion of this for you.
I now turn to the question of community impact. Under Section 63 of the Sentencing Act 2020, I must consider the harm which the defendant intended and that which might foreseeably have been caused. I've seen statements in relation to this topic and viewed a compilation of footage taken at the time. According to the statement of Superintendent Pearman, the period following the Facebook post on the 20th of May 2020 was turbulent in Barrow. He says that Barrow had not seen such a public display of anger for 30 years. There were public demonstrations targeting the local paper, the local Asian community, and the police. This was in the height of the first lockdown, and Superintendent Pearman tells me in his statement that there was a sense of heightened tension for about 4 months. The comments attracted by the defendant's post named local businesses who feared they'd be subject to attack. One restaurant had its windows smashed. Police resources were diverted to dealing with the threat. Death threats were made against local restaurant owners. Marches were organised to protest about a suspected police cover-up. The fire service installed smoke alarms at vulnerable premises. Local journalists were the subject of credible threats. One left her home and moved out of the area. Racist anti-police graffiti was sprayed on a wall in Barrow. Threats were made on social media against the police. A demonstration convoy of cars drove from Barrow to Ulverston and back again on the 25th of May. The police were under pressure from those who believed they were complicit in a cover-up on the one hand, and those who felt unsafe at the hands of apparent vigilantes on the other. Individual police officers on patrol seeking to support the community in COVID were subject to insults. Social services were also the subject of unwarranted insults and criticism. The local newspaper was subject to boycotts and ultimately, I'm told, collapsed for financial reasons, though there's no evidence before me upon which I could conclude that this was a direct result of the boycott. By mid-June, there were ongoing protests. These appear to have been in response to a person from outside Barrow who was active in the demonstrations having been arrested. The issue then appeared to be more his arrest. Nonetheless, there were serious consequences. An Indian restaurant's windows were smashed. There were further protests and further allegations of a police cover-up. In the meantime, there were credible threats to police officers. Attempts were made to find their home addresses. Online threats were made that they will be found and they will be harmed. I'm told that this state of arrest continued until the August of 2019. Local people felt motivated to donate their money to a fund which was set up to support this defendant. This fund quickly reached £22,000. What effect, if any, should this have on the sentence of the defendant? During the course of this trial, I've heard many days of evidence from this defendant and have read hundreds of her social media communications. It is not the Crown's case that when she blamed Asian and Pakistani men for her abuse, she was racially motivated. I agree with that position and will sentence on the basis that she was not so motivated. I note that in this case, she has made false allegations about white men also. I'm sure she chose to lie about Asian men because she was modelling her lies on other cases of national prominence. She regarded the prospects of being believed as greater if she based them on true cases already within the public consciousness. She was not principally motivated by a desire to stir up public unrest. However, I cannot conclude that she chose to make her Facebook post of the 20th of May 2020 for any other reason than that she intended to create an impact within the town. I accept that there was no direct incitement to do anything, but it was entirely foreseeable that there will be considerable community impact upon those of Asian or Pakistani heritage. She cannot be held wholly or directly responsible for the criminal behaviour of others who used her allegations as an excuse for their own inexcusable conduct, but it was foreseeable that others would behave in antisocial and unacceptable ways. It was not foreseeable that her cause would be taken up by those outside Barrow and developed to the extent that it did. However, some community impact was foreseeable. To that limited extent, I take into account the community impact. The harm of this offending extends to an undermining of public confidence in the criminal justice system. We are aware that sex trafficking of young females does occur. There is a risk that genuine victims will, as a result of this defendant's actions, feel deterred from reporting it. People may be less likely to believe their allegations. I'm sure that those charged with investigating such offences will do all in their power to avoid any reluctance to investigate such allegations. In this case, I make reduction for the defendant's age, then for personal mitigation. In relation to count 9 only, I reduce the sentence for credit for a guilty plea. I then further adjust the sentences for totality. To assist in understanding how I've arrived at my overall sentence, I've first set out the sentences after trial for each count without applying any reduction for any of these factors. In relation to count 1, the sentence would have been 2 years imprisonment. For counts 2, 3 and 4, 5 years imprisonment, concurrent with each other, but consecutive to the sentence on count 1. For counts 5, 6 and 7, 7.5 years imprisonment, concurrent with each other but consecutive to the sentences already imposed. For count 8, 2 years imprisonment, and for count 9, 1 year and 4 months imprisonment, both consecutive to the sentences already imposed. I then turn to the various reductions for the factors mentioned above. The defendant was a child when she committed the offence at count 1. The relevant guideline indicates that the court should take as its starting point the sentence likely to have been imposed on the date at which the offence was committed. That sentence would have been, if custodial, a detention and training order of less than 2 years. The reduction from the adult sentence will be 1/2 for count 1. In relation to the other counts, the reduction for age will be of the order of 1/4. There will be a reduction for age of 1/3 from the adult sentence in relation to counts 2 to 4. In relation to the other counts, the reduction for age will be of the order of 1/4. She was 19 during much of this offending. After her false allegations about Mr. Trengove, this was not impulsive offending arising from naivety. That explains the lesser reduction. I then reduce the sentences further to take account of her personal mitigation. I then reduce the sentence on count 9 to reflect her credit. Finally, I take account of totality. I do this by making the sentences on counts 8 and 9 concurrent with each other and other sentences, and by further reducing the sentences on counts 5 to 7. Eleanor Williams, please stand up. These are the sentences that you will serve. On count 1, there will be a sentence of 6 months imprisonment. On counts 3 to 5, the sentence will be 3 years imprisonment, concurrent on each count, but consecutive to the sentence on count 1, giving a total so far of 3.5 years. There will be sentences of 5 years on counts 5, 6 and 7, concurrent with one another, but consecutive to the sentences already imposed. Finally, there will be a sentence of 1 year and 3 months imprisonment on count 8 and 6 months imprisonment on count 9. Those sentences to run concurrently with each other and the other sentences imposed. That gives a total sentence of 8.5 years imprisonment. You will serve half of the total sentence of imprisonment in custody, after which you will be released on licence. The days spent in custody will count towards your sentence. You've spent 361 days on a qualifying curfew. Because of that, the time you must spend in custody is reduced by 179 days. If that figure is incorrect, it can be corrected later without a further hearing. On release, your licence will be subject to conditions. If you breach the terms of your licence, you'll be liable to be recalled to serve the remainder of the sentence. There is an application for a serious crime prevention order. I find that this is a serious offence for the purposes of this application. There are reasonable grounds for believing that the order will protect the public. I exercise my discretion in favour of making the order as sought, with amendments to the effect that she may also possess a tablet and games console, and that you may also be able to operate a work and a personal email. That order will run for a period of 5 years from the 17th of February 2025. I order deprivation and destruction of the items on page 1 of divider 8 of the Crown's bundle of documents. If the statutory surcharge applies, the order can be drawn up in the appropriate amount. Thank you. Sit down, please.
So Eleanor Williams, by this point 22 years old, was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison to serve half before she comes out on licence. In August 2023, she appealed her conviction, i.e. she's continuing to claim that she's innocent, but this was denied. There were plans for a review as to whether her sentence was too lenient, but this did not proceed. So Eleanor Williams has to serve 4.25 years in prison, but taking off time she'd already spent on remand, I estimate she's likely to be released in around March 2026. I need to divide this section into two. So, to begin with, we're going to look at the 4 men whose lives Eleanor Williams destroyed, but after that, we look far wider. So, with regards to male C, who Williams accused of rape in 2017, in court, his victim impact statement was read out, which stated that the impact of being accused of being a rapist was massive. Even 5 years later, he was struggling to cope and couldn't bring himself to go back to Barrow Town Centre because he feared he was still labelled a sex offender. He could also not bring himself to pick up his own son from nursery due to fear people would make accusations. Jordan Trengove, who was accused of rape 3 times and who spent 2 months in prison, later wrote about what happened after he was released. Quote, "I was barred from everywhere. I was called a rapist, a nonce." He then moved away into a new property out of the area, but stated, quote, "I thought it would end, but the first day we moved in, I had someone shout rapist at me. It was clear then that no matter where I went, someone would always know." He explained that he had a son after his initial arrest, and social services were inundated with anonymous reports that he was a rapist and not safe to be around children. Jordan also explained that his family were harassed. Things settled down for a time, but then, when Williams posted a Facebook message in May 2020, he was named and the harassment started again. He attempted suicide after this happened, but was thankfully unsuccessful. Mo Ramzan, who was accused by Williams of being the head of an international sex trafficking ring, also tried to take his own life. He was the subject of repeated death threats, aimed not only at him, but also his wife and children. His businesses were targeted, he was spat on in the street. Even 5 years after the ordeal, he stated, quote, "I'm not sure how my family and I are going to recover from this. The mud sticks, and I fear it may take some time." For Oliver Gardner, his arrest in July 2019 and the stigma of being falsely labelled a rapist meant he had a mental breakdown and ended up being sectioned. When he was released, he attempted to take his own life and was sectioned again. It appears, from the statistics, thankfully, that false allegations of rape are extremely rare. However, on this occasion, all of these men have had their lives and mental health ruined by Eleanor Williams, and she has never taken any responsibility for the devastation she has caused. What Williams did to these men was horrific, but her actions had far wider implications, including to herself. With her, if something were to happen to her in the future, and she was a real victim of a serious crime, there's the potential she would not be believed. If she got to court, her history would likely be used against her. She's essentially reduced the chances of her actually getting justice if she needed to in the future. However, going further than that, and this is the part that really sickens me, if you've worked in the criminal justice system, you'll likely know how difficult it is for rape victims to get justice. Convictions for this evil offence are extremely low, and many people don't even report what's happened to them for fear of not being believed. Eleanor Williams, with her sick need to gain attention, has compounded this already terrible situation. Firstly, her false claims and unpicking her lies took hundreds upon hundreds of man-hours. She was even offered police protection. This placement and this huge amount of police resources could have been used to help real victims. Also, it's inevitably created a huge amount of cynicism in the police. They'd believed Williams wholeheartedly in the beginning and were trying to get her justice, and they'd been lied to throughout. We're only human, and unfortunately, if people lie to us, it makes it very difficult to trust people 100% moving forward. Another consequence is that the relationship with the Asian community was completely destroyed. Let's say a paedophile ring does begin to operate in this area in the future, and some of the perpetrators are Asian, there could potentially be reluctance from people within this community to pick up the phone and report this because, even though they have nothing to do with it, they could very well be getting a brick through their window or their family and children being threatened. But worst of all, Eleanor Williams has diminished the real stories of survival and strength of those men and women who have been the victim of horrific acts of sexual abuse, who truly have to live with the physical and emotional scars of their ordeals. That is something that I, and I'm sure many others, can never forgive. This case is somewhat outside of what I usually cover, but I think that Eleanor Williams is still a dangerous, and I would argue, evil woman. I mentioned before that she was assessed by psychiatrists and psychologists in prison who prepared reports for the court. However, ultimately, they couldn't get a handle on this case. All that was offered was that potentially she was suffering from complex PTSD linked to undisclosed childhood trauma. Essentially, she was acting out because she herself had likely been the victim of sexual abuse somewhere in her past, and her behaviour was her way of dealing with this. The judge was sceptical of this. I don't think it's wholly accurate. I think there was childhood trauma, as it's clear, at least to me, that Eleanor Williams is an extremely disturbed young lady. Specifically, I think that for whatever reason, Williams grew up feeling marginalised and ignored as a child. This, I think, could potentially be a sign of some sort of neglect. Being raised in this environment would have meant that she likely grew up with extremely low self-esteem and, due to having no internal feelings of self-worth, she relied solely on others to make her feel wanted. This led to her craving attention, and she would go to any lengths to get it. If people were paying attention to her, she mattered, she existed. I think she quickly realised that lying, making up stories where she was somehow the victim, got people's attention, so she began by making up lies about being pregnant and having abortions, things she hoped would get people's attention, and they'd be saying, "Oh, poor Ellie." I think that her allegations are an extension of this. I think her initial allegation of rape against male C in 2017 was potentially a way for her to get out of a difficult situation. She got drunk and high and ended up in hospital, inevitably in trouble with her mother. Potentially it pops into her head that if she made up a lie that she'd been raped, then the attention would be shifted away from her poor behaviour to her being seen as the victim, and it worked. I think at this moment, Williams saw the power of these allegations, and that when she made them, not only was she able to get out of situations, but there was suddenly a huge number of people paying attention to her, including the police. I think she believed that the more elaborate and horrific her stories were, the more attention she would get, and the more people would give her their time. Hence why, as time progressed, the stories got more and more outlandish. Williams' sole focus was on the here and now. Her lies were easy to refute, but that didn't matter. She wanted the attention. If she got caught out in the lies later, she would just come up with more. As long as someone was noticing her and paying attention to her, that was all that mattered. When the police finally tired of her, I imagine that Williams was distressed. Where would the attention come from now? The answer: social media. There were millions of new people she could sell her lies to, who would believe her, without any question. I can imagine her lying in bed at 2 a.m, repeatedly refreshing her social media pages, revelling in the attention, with everyone talking about poor Ellie. However, I think there's a far more sinister side to Williams' behaviour, which leads me to believe that she's likely a psychopath, someone without any conscience, remorse, or guilt for her actions. Going back to her childhood, if she did indeed grow up in a neglectful household, then she potentially wouldn't have been taught about empathy or remorse. This, coupled with her need for attention, suggests that she's a woman who, in order to achieve this, will do anything she has to. There is no line in her head that she will not cross. If she has to harm people in order to get what she wants, then that's what she'll do, and she'll feel no guilt about it at all. I have no doubt that Williams researched the most salacious stories related to child abuse and came across information about the Rochdale case. I think she deliberately added the detail that her abusers were Asian in order to increase the level of attention she got, but also sickeningly to dupe people into seeing her in the same light as these real victims. However, outside of this research, I think she was also extremely opportunistic. If she even came across a man on the street, she saw an opportunity. I can say he raped me. There's another story I can wheel out. There's no doubt that Williams is mentally unwell, but she knew exactly what she was doing. This is why I think she deserves the label of evil. It's clear that Eleanor Williams' whole life has been about avoiding really looking at herself and addressing the deep dark hole inside of her that she tries to fill with this behaviour. It's therefore no surprise that she refused to take responsibility despite overwhelming evidence and continues to deny any fault. To do so would be to acknowledge how weak she is, and there is no way she will do that. It's only by the grace of God that she does not have the blood of these men on her hands. I think that she's a very dangerous woman, and I can only imagine what she'll do when she comes out. She's clearly a woman capable of just about anything. Not only was she accused complete strangers of raping her and being involved in sex trafficking, but she bashed herself in the face with a hammer. There was mention, as I stated before, about part of her finger being severed, but I can't see any further comment on that, so it's not clear whether she also chopped off part of her own finger to sell her story. In terms of the future, I have serious concerns about what she'd be like in a relationship, and also if she has children one day. In a relationship, she could potentially, if her partner annoyed her or threatened to leave her, claim she was abused, and then injure herself and go running to the police. With regards to children, she strikes me as the sort of person who would potentially harm or potentially even kill that child in order to get attention for herself, i.e. Munchausen's by proxy. However, I think the danger of Williams is that her behaviour is so difficult to predict and manage. In clinical settings, when we discuss risk that a person poses, it's usually towards named people, for example partners, or potentially groups of individuals, for example police. In almost all cases, if the person doesn't have contact with the individuals or the group you're concerned about, there's no current risk. So for example, if a domestic abuser is not currently in a relationship. However, with Eleanor Williams, she could potentially accuse any man in any environment, even one she's never met, of the most serious crimes imaginable. How do you manage that? I don't honestly think you can. Whilst this case is outside of what I usually cover, I think it's really interesting, and I'd really love to hear your thoughts, so please feel free to comment below. If you like the content, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button. Also, you can send a super thanks, which is a one-off payment to support the channel. Please like, share and subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.